Where did it all begin? Our founder Ymir, the royal Fritz family, the Reiss bloodline, Grisha Yeager, Eren Yeager. Everything crosses at the coordinate within the paths. Every site, everything started at the founding titan. Complacency, sacrifice. How does the founding titan, something with a power that seems absolute, embody these two very seemingly passive qualities? There is only one way to understand, and for that understanding, we must start at the beginning. From you, 2,000 years ago. Born in a small village, Ymir became a slave of Eldia that was under the rule of King Fritz. She was portrayed to be a kind and caring girl, someone who was sacrificed time and time again, each time being more extreme than the last. She would eventually even end up giving her very own life. After becoming a slave of Eldia, Ymir, along with her fellow survivors from the ravaged village, had their tongues cut out. There was nothing she could even dare say to her oppressors. Nothing she could physically do. The only thing she could do was accept this fate. There was no freedom. Freedom. Freedom? On one fateful day, Ymir decides to let pigs out of their pen to give them freedom. This was the closest thing she could attain to the feeling of being free. Something that was so far out of reach for her that she would decide to give it to something else instead. After King Fritz realizes what's happened, he questions all of his slaves at once, looking for the person responsible. He threatens each and every one of them with losing one eye because, according to him, slaves don't need two eyes. Afraid of this threat, they all point towards Ymir, and for this unforgivable sin, he gives her what she desired: freedom. Unfortunately, it was not the freedom she was expecting. Shortly afterwards, we see a heavily wounded Ymir running for her life. She's being chased and hunted down like an animal by men on horseback that the king has sent out shortly after setting her free. They mercilessly shoot her with arrows, and she continues pressing on, desperately clinging to the newfound freedom she has been granted. She eventually falls over, gazing at a lonesome flower with tears running down her eyes. She then looks up, and what she sees is a gigantic tree with an odd opening. She finds the strength to get up again, still desperately clinging on to her life, and makes her way towards the tree. Upon entering, she slips and falls into what seems to be a deep body of water. She begins to sink and drown, but before drawing her last breath, something mysterious seems to make their way towards her from underneath, and she comes into contact with this very strange creature. Some refer to it as something, some refer to it as the source of all life, some refer to it as the devil, and some refer to it as the hallucinogenia. It doesn't matter what it is or what it was. The name means nothing. In the end, she became something far greater than that being. Something that some will look to as a god, and others a devil. Something that will push humanity forward and at the same time bring about calamity. Only one thing can reach these heights and be praised, yet hated all the same. Its name: the founding titan. If you're Ymir and you've lived a life of oppression and wrongful treatment as a slave, home ravaged, body disfigured, hunted like an animal for the sin of freeing pigs from their pen, what would you do the moment you obtained such overwhelming power? I'm sure most would say get their revenge, to free her people, to pay their oppressors back for all the pain they've inflicted. And I couldn't blame you, because the moment I've seen the truth, I too, like many others, was struck by the actions taken next. Ymir doesn't get revenge. She doesn't kill the king. She doesn't free her people. Instead, she returns to King Fritz, willingly, with her newfound godlike power, and becomes his slave once more. And once more, she sacrifices herself. She annihilates his enemies of Marley, and furthers the oppression placed upon them, and because of this, he grants her with the utmost gift of bearing his children, and bearing her the last name of Fritz. Once again, she sacrifices herself. She does all of these things for him because she believes it brings her closer to him, closer to his heart. But in truth, he never had a heart to get close to begin with. The ultimate display of this sentiment is shown when Ymir jumps in front of a spear thrown by an enemy soldier aimed to kill the king. Once again, she sacrifices herself, and this time to a devastating degree. She does this because, as I said before, she wants to get closer to his heart, a heart he does not have. She truly believed this man loved her, but the only thing he actually loved was the power she possessed. It became his obsession. He never looked at Ymir, only through her because of what dwelled within. She could provide something he wanted. This scene is quite disturbing for several reasons, and not only because of King Fritz, but Ymir as well, and what will follow shortly afterwards. Ymir herself made the decision to sacrifice herself, even in the presence of her children. I'm sure they were aware of the power she possessed and the nature of her powers, most certainly her quasi-immortality. Given, the king speaks of it afterwards so casually, but still, to willingly do this with no regard for the effects of her children and no regard for herself, is honestly a horrifying thought, no? This scene of Ymir throwing herself in front of King Fritz is followed by him with a worrisome look on his face, and most would think it's because she was in extreme pain. While her life wasn't in immediate danger, given her Titan shifter abilities, it doesn't take away the pain one feels from taking such injuries on to themselves. But the truth is much less dignified and honestly disgusting and horrific. King Fritz, instead of being caring in any regard to Ymir as a person, instead asks her what she is doing and tells her to stand up. He tells her to rise, to work, and that's the only reason she was born. He looks at her as nothing more than a mere slave. As we all know, Titan shifters are unlikely to die from any wound placed upon them, and what was inflicted upon Ymir Fritz wasn't even the worst of what a Titan shifter has experienced. They can come back from seemingly any injury, even those of which will be considered fatal, unless you lose your will to live. After Ymir realizes that King Fritz cares for her as nothing more than a mere slave, she succumbs to her injuries, her will to live tied to the love she believed the king had for her. She ultimately sacrificed her life. She had grown complacent in her life as a slave to the king, and unable or unwilling to see the truth that was right in front of her, which led her to that moment. After she passes on, she is now thrust into a dimension known as the Paths, to dwell for seemingly eternity, with nothing but a glow of a tree that looks similar to the one she herself fell into all those years ago, when she came into contact with that something that granted her the power King Fritz was so obsessed with. Damned to wander the endless sands for eternity in the form of her child self. This shows us she was never able to grow past that point of the day she became a slave, that she never grew closer with the one she loved. She herself thinks she's nothing more than a slave. The Paths, a place where she will be forced to remain complacent forever. Complacency, sacrifice. These two qualities will follow soon afterwards for every founding Titan shifter we've come to know of thus far, which will not only endanger themselves, but humanity as well. A far worse fate was soon approaching. Remember how I said what had taken place shortly after was disturbing? Well, I'm sure we all know what that was. King Fritz, obsessed with the power Ymir held, did not want it to vanish from his grasp, and he would maintain it at any cost. This obsession led him to forcing his and Ymir's children to eat her body, to attempt to maintain that power in his Eldian empire, and this actually works. While King Fritz is on his deathbed, he tasks his daughters with giving birth and multiplying their bloodline to ensure that Ymir's blood stays a part of their empire. He states that if they were to die, that their own children eat their spines, and that if his grandchildren were to die, then pass their spines on to other children. He declares that even after he dies, that his titans will rule the world for eternity. During the scene of King Fritz making these statements, we see Ymir within the paths. She's working on the walls of Paradis Island and the colossal titans within them under the orders of the royal bloodline, Karl Fritz, the 145th king to be specific, a future inheritor of the founding titan. Even within paths, even after death, she still sacrifices. She is still a slave to the future inheritors of the founder. Karl Fritz, not to be confused with King Fritz, as so many people do, was a very interesting key component because had it not been for him, then the story we know of now may not have taken place. Honestly, he was the one that pushed the concepts of complacency and sacrifice to their limits, and what drove the story of the direction it would eventually go in. Karl Fritz ultimately doomed not only his bloodline, but his subjects and empire as well. The Eldian Empire was without a doubt the most powerful empire to ever exist within the Attack on Titan universe. Built upon bloodshed and war, Karl Fritz would come to loathe all of the conflict, specifically the Great Titan War. This war would greatly affect the king, his views on the history of his empire and the future of his people. This was a civil war that had taken place within the Eldian Empire itself, once the empire had run out of enemies to conquer. The notable participants of this war were Karl Fritz, the Tiber family, Marley, and the fabricated hero of the war, Helos. These participants are all very important because it shapes the true and false history within and outside the walls, and the views on the founding titan itself. As I said before, Karl Fritz loathed the conflict, so much so that he would abandon his empire. Conspiring with the Tiber family, they would come to create the false hero of the war, Helos. Following this, the king would retreat to Paradis Island with some of his subjects, leaving behind a great number of them on the continent of Marley and scattered around the rest of the world. After fleeing the mainland and creating the walls and the millions of colossal titans within said walls, the king would make a false declaration to the rest of the world. He would declare that if anyone dared interfere with the peace of him or his people, then he would unleash these titans upon the earth and flatten it, destroying the world. This event would be known as the Rumbling, but as we know, this statement was a lie. The only people aware of this lie would be the future inheritors of the founding titan within the royal bloodline and the Tiber family. This is when the spread of history of the world will become lost, convoluted, and used as propaganda. Also when the effects of Karl Fritz will be felt forever. Complacency and sacrifice. There are so many different ways to interpret it within the context of this story. It goes without saying that the theme has been a core staple point within the frame of the story, and Karl Fritz is no exception to the rule. It goes even further for him because he will force this on the only world his people knew. It's important to establish after Karl Fritz fled the mainland, then it would lead Marley to being established as the new world power, and 7 of the 9 titans will fall under their control. With the power of the founding titan, Karl Fritz would steal the memories of his people and force them to believe that they were all that remained of humanity after he created the 3 walls. He would change the true name of the royal bloodline from Fritz to Reiss and live as nobles, passing the name Fritz to a different bloodline to play the role of a false royal bloodline to protect the true royal bloodline. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you, but I digress. To get back on track, he would then offer those unaffected by the power of the founding titans' memory manipulation roles as nobles to prevent the spread of the true history beyond the walls. And those who would reject this ideology, for example the Ackerman clan and the Asian clan, would be persecuted, to literally be exterminated, all in order to keep the truth of the world from ever becoming known. Karl Fritz would then create the vow-renouncing war with the founding titan. This vow would force every single inheritor of the now named Reiss family to become overtaken by the will of Karl Fritz and prevent them from taking any action if the walls were ever to come under attack. You see, he believes that if the day ever came that Marley gained the strength to challenge Eldia, then he, along with the Reiss family, would accept this, as he believes the sins committed by the Eldian Empire are too great to ever atone for. But before the day of reckoning were to ever appear on their doorstep, to let him enjoy an age of peace. This vow, renouncing war, literally put the 145th king's will onto every future inheritor, and seemingly against their will and beliefs. We see two prominent examples of this through Uri Reiss and Frieda Reiss. Uri Reiss and his brother Rod Reiss were the children of an unnamed father who was a previous inheritor of the founder. Uri and Rod both pleaded with their father to kill the Titans and liberate humanity, but he would not act. Just look at them with eyes that glistened with an odd color, indicating that he was under the influence of Karl Fritz. Uri would later become the next inheritor after his father. He had every intention of liberating humanity from the Titans. After the Titan inheritance ritual took place, Uri would awake and slowly open his eyes toward his older brother, and he looked at him with those same oddly colored eyes, the same as his father, showing that he too fell under the influence of the 145th king, Karl Fritz. After the 13-year lifespan of Uri was reached, Ra's daughter will be chosen as the next inheritor. Ra's daughter, Frieda Reiss. She told her father that she would not fall to the ghosts of their ancestors, that she would liberate humanity from the Titans. And when she awoke after the ritual, she too looked at him with those same eyes, the same eyes as his brother. Those eyes that would dare to damn their entire race to extinction if the day ever came. Those eyes that sought to remain complacent and sacrifice their own people for the betterment of humanity outside the walls. Simply put, Karl Fritz's will, the vow renouncing war, continues to echo throughout history long after his death. The truly sad part about Frieda's case is that we get to see her struggle, and I mean really struggle, to fight this vow placed upon her. There is a scene of her literally gripping her head. It looks almost as if she can hear voices and trying desperately to fight against what is happening. But there is a more prominent scene. It's when she would encounter someone who would dare stand against this ideology, this vow renouncing war. Someone who held a look in their eyes as well. A look the owl said could burn the world to ashes. His name, Grisha Yeager. Remember that I said before that complacency and sacrifice can be interpreted differently? This is shown no better by than the ones who would inherit, or rather steal, the founding titan from the rightful hands of the royal bloodline. Grisha Yeager, seeking freedom, seeking revenge, becomes complacent in his beliefs and his ideals surrounding Eldia. He initially adopts these beliefs after learning of the horrific fate that befell his younger sister, Faye Yeager, after he dared to go beyond the walls of his internment zone. Before this, however, Grisha did try to let go and make peace with his past. He became a doctor, distracted himself with work, and just living a typical life as an oppressed Eldian in Marley. One day, however, a man with the surname of Grice would become one of his patients, and he would deliver a message to Grisha. It was the truth of what happened the day he went beyond the walls with his younger sister, Faye, and how she truly met her untimely demise. And this would reignite that burning fire of hatred that lied dormant inside of him. And just as when he was a child, we once again see those eyes that could burn the world to ashes. He swore to himself that he would teach Marley who the true devils were, and what his ancestors had done was right. That if the world was to be set right once more, then Eldia had to come back into power. Complacent in these convictions, he would sacrifice again and again and again. After Grisha became a member of the Restorationists, he would eventually become their de facto leader, and the one in charge of interpreting what he believed to be the true history of Eldia and Ymir Fritz. I said before, the participants of the Great Titan War were extremely important because it would come to shape the true and false history within and beyond the walls of Paradis Island. Of course, this would extend to the mainland of Marley as well, considering the Tibers and Karl Fritz conspired with each other. You see, the way Grisha interpreted the history of Eldia was that he believed Ymir cultivated the waste, built roads, and built bridges that would span mountains. He completely believed that what Ymir brought to humanity was wealth and that she enriched people and developed a continent, that Ymir was wholly good. He believed the Marleyan history was a fabrication to make Marley look good and to paint Eldians of not only the past, but the present as devils. We know this isn't entirely the case of either side, that it was actually a combination of both histories. While Ymir did bring about great creation and progress to humanity, due to the power she held, she would also play a vital role in the destruction and suffering of many nations, with the most notable being, of course, Marley. Due to Grisha's blindness of this thought and possibility, it would only drive him further into his obsession with his mission, and unfortunately, it would soon affect the people closest to him to a devastating degree, physically and emotionally.
Damn it! This is bullshit!
Talk like that. We need to support him. He's trying his best. Can't you
His
see
best
that?
isn't enough! He'll never become a warrior like that!
Soon after Grisha joined the Restorationists, he would meet a woman of royal blood. Her name, Ymir Fritz. They would fall in love, marry, have a child, name him Zeke, and they believed Zeke would be their savior, the one to put an end to the suffering of Eldians. While Zeke did want to put an end to the suffering of Eldians, unfortunately, it wouldn't be in the way Grisha would want. And if you want to know more about that, I do have a video of the Beast Titan. But I digress. Grisha would cause his firstborn to suffer extreme emotional damage to the point where Zeke would tell the Marleyan government that his parents were a part of the Restorationist movement. Grisha sacrificed Zeke's happiness along with their relationship, in turn causing Grisha to be shipped off to Paradis to be transformed into a pure Titan. Grisha even realizes his own complacency. While Grisha is on Paradis Island, he recounts everything that transpired from the day his sister died up until the point where he was shipped off. He would refer to himself as the same foolish child he was back then, recognizing his own complacency within himself. To go back a little bit before that moment, once Grisha arrived to Paradis Island, he would be met with the sight of all his fellow Restorationist members, and he would witness them be turned into pure Titans one after the other, even his wife, Dinah. After witnessing this, Grisha would be saved from this fate by the one known as the Owl, his true name, Eren Kruger. After being saved by Eren Kruger, Grisha would come to recognize all the faults within himself, stating that he was a bad father, a bad husband, and a bad man. His actions directly caused all of these things to occur, and in the end, he paid a heavy price for it, a price he wouldn't have paid if he knew this would be the toll. Grisha would ask Kruger why he didn't save anyone else, why only him. He begs Kruger for an answer. What Kruger says implies that those were necessary sacrifices in order to save Eldia. He specifically says that he cut the fingers of thousands of subjects of Ymir, turned them into Titans, men, women, and children. It was all the same because he truly believed he did it to serve Eldia. He tells Grisha that had the Marleyan military known about the royal blood of Dinah, they would have forced her to bear children. Kruger eventually tasked Grisha with the goal of stripping the king of the walls of the founding Titan, informing him that he refuses to fight and wishes for the Eldians' demise. He told Grisha once he enters the walls that he needs to love someone in those walls, that he needs to push forward. Grisha at first is reluctant, but after he sees a picture of his former family, that fire to press on is ignited once more. He tells Grisha that he needs to see this through to save Armin and Mikasa, but Grisha is left confused by this statement, but it will ring true soon enough. This whole exchange and the fact that Grisha actually continues on with his mission implies that he also believed that everything that happened was a necessary sacrifice, and that it would serve the greater good of Eldia eventually. Grisha does indeed go into the walls. He meets another woman and they marry. Her name? Carla. They have a son, and Grisha names him after the person that sent him on this mission. His name? Eren Yeager. During Eren's childhood, he befriends a boy named Armin Arlet, and he saves the life of Mikasa Ackerman. While not entirely necessary to add here, I figured to keep the motion fluid, I would add that fact. On the day Grisha decides to head to the Reiss Chapel, he tells Eren that one day he will show him what's in the basement, gripping a key. Grisha eventually arrives at the Royal Chapel, and he takes the founding titan from Frieda Reiss and kills the remaining members of the royal family, all aside from Rod Reiss. He pressed on in his mission, and eventually, after returning from that massacre, he is met with information of an even greater massacre that had taken place while he was away. He finds out his home was destroyed and his wife was killed when the walls were broken. I can only imagine that this would have the same impact as everything else that transpired in his life up until this point. Once again, he had to sacrifice in order to get even further. His second wife, his home, and eventually, his life. On the day of Grisha's return, he decides to take Eren into the woods, and he turns him into a pure titan, pleased with him to master this power and feeds himself to his son, turning him into not only the holder of the attack titan, but the founding titan as well. The truly sad part about Grisha is through his journey, he truly did try to change and end his mission several times, only to press on. After the tragedy that befell his first family, he never wanted to experience anything like that ever again, fully regretting how he treated Zeke. He wanted to be a better father to Eren, a better husband to Carla, and a better man overall. He lost so much, but pressed on anyway. He wanted to change, but continued with his mission. Why? Why was he so complacent with these ideals? Why would he sacrifice so much? We would come to find out soon enough. So, where did it all begin? Maybe here? Or here? Or here? The truth is, it doesn't matter where, because everything comes after this. Complacency and Sacrifice. Eren Yeager. He may in fact be the most extreme case for these two concepts within the founding titan inheritance line. And as we know, Karl Fritz himself was pretty integral to these two thematic concepts. So what could be beyond that? Well, as we know, Karl Fritz will willingly give up his people, history, and empire in order to right the wrongs of the past or the blood-soaked history Eldia was built upon. He believed this to be the only retribution for the sins Eldia committed. Eren, however, was different, and understandably so. Why did the Eldians born on Paradis deserve to be caged like livestock? Why did they deserve to pay for the sins of the past? Why? On that day, was his mother eaten by a titan? For someone who always had the curiosity of exploring the outside world and the desire to go beyond those walls, and experience what he believed to be true freedom. Of course, those ideals wouldn't be understood or accepted by such a person. So, how? How is Eren complacent if he doesn't follow the desires of Karl Fritz? If you haven't noticed already, there's a running theme of each inheritor being singularly focused on one goal, that is, true peace. They each attempt it in their own ways, some by listening to their masters, some by having it forced upon them, by others or their environment, some by seeing something beyond the hell, maybe it's hope, and others may see a different hell that'll lead to peace. Eren did in fact see something beyond the hell, and it was another hell. He decided to make the threat of the Wall Titans trampling the earth a reality, the rumbling. He would take the burden of trampling upon a multitude of people on the planet in order to assure the survival of his people, most importantly, his friends, those who he came to care for the most. Getting to this point didn't come without sacrifices either, of course. Eren has indirectly caused the deaths and pain of many of those around him because of what he had inside of him. Eren being one of the military's central pieces to their overall strength. This fact will cause the scouts to make hard and rash decisions if Eren had ever been a target of pursuit and capture, causing many lives to be lost, and not just those of the military. Eren would come to despise himself because of this, and the culmination of it was when he pleaded with Historia to eat him and free humanity, at a time when he wasn't aware of the renouncing war, and that his father wasn't in the wrong for destroying the Reiss family. This all changed on the day he kissed Historia's hand, after the tragedy in the Return to Shiganshina arc. The lives lost on that day were incomparable at the time, and the look on Eren's face at the ceremony that followed shortly after speaks volumes. Not only had the military been reduced to almost nothing, but the outside world wasn't as beautiful as he believed it to be, like it was portrayed in Armin's book. Before the ceremony, he, along with everyone else, comes to learn that they are in fact a hated race around the world, because they have the capability to potentially turn into titans, and that even across the sea, they are still bound by walls and oppressed. You come to soon realize, not only is humanity not extinct, but that same humanity wants them gone. Okay, so imagine being Eren for a moment. You learn of these man-eating monsters called titans, and how they've reduced the remaining remnants of humanity to the walls. And then you have your world turned upside down by the appearance of these monsters you've only heard about in stories. These monsters appear one day and wreak havoc on your home. Your mother gets eaten before your very eyes, and you join the military to make a difference in order to save humanity, with the hatred of titans and the desire to be free driving you. Then, come to find out, you're able to turn into one of these creatures you despise so much and wish to rid the world of. Then, people who you've allied with are not only titan shifters just like you, but are also the ones responsible for the tragedy that befell your home and mother getting eaten. You learn that you've eaten your father in order to get this power, and then you learn that the humanity you want to protect is being lied to by the people in power, secretly wishing for humanity within the walls to be exterminated. You help in usurping the throne in order to bring about a new king who cares for their people, but you learn that not only is humanity outside the walls not extinct, but they live in elegance, that they despise you because of the blood that runs through your veins and the past that transpired that you have nothing to do with. But also, they are the reason several titans are on your island that cause you misery your entire life. And then, to add on to that, of course, you kill these monsters because that's what you knew them to be. So, they've also made you kill innocent people, turn titan. So, I would say his world has been turned upside down a multitude of times, but back to the main point. After learning all of these things, we see Eren at the ceremony, and as I said before, the look on his face speaks volumes. He had a somber expression. It's clear he was confused about everything that he had come to know, especially considering he literally questions what it was they discovered in the basement. Was it hope or despair? He inner monologues to himself before he kisses Historia's hand and says that he would willingly give up his life if he knew it'd make a difference. But after he kisses her hand, everything changes. Kind of. Let me explain. You see, we've always known Eren for two things: his love of freedom and his hatred towards Titans. If the Titans continue to exist, that means he wasn't free. Eren was looked at as the hope and strength humanity needed in order to survive, whether it was against Titans or nations of the world. But seeing as his perspective of Titans changed after learning the truth, all he is left with is hatred. Who does he pin this hatred on next? The ones who caused him to despair in the first place. Everyone across the sea. He believed if he killed everyone across the sea, that he and his friends would finally be free. What Eren saw when he kissed Historia's hand was true hell. He saw a multitude of things, such as his older self manipulating his father within the Reiss Chapel, and caused him to annihilate the royal family. This is how Eren reignited the fire within Grisha. He reminded him of the moments he despaired, why he came this far, and to see his mission through. Along with that memory, Eren also witnessed the death of his dear friend, Sasha, and he even witnessed himself initiating the rumbling. The reason these things were so shocking to him was because he didn't understand it. Eren has always had a reason behind his actions, and him seeing these things had him at a loss because it seemed so out of place and different from decisions he would actually make. But truthfully, the only thing he needed to change was who he aimed his hatred at, which was everyone outside the walls. This was the only way to rationalize what he saw and why he would come to do everything he's done. This is why, before traversing the sea, he asked Armin and Mikasa if they will all be free if they killed everyone on the other side. What I'm getting at is the role complacency plays in Eren's story. He became complacent in his chase towards freedom and in his hatred that would drive him to reach it. He would inadvertently sacrifice the lives of many in order to keep moving forward, one of which was his closest friends. The biggest sacrifice was yet to come, at least looking at it from the perspective of who Eren is and how much he values freedom. What I mean is, for someone who wanted to attain freedom more than anything else in the world, we as the audience come to realize the truth. Eren isn't free. He's never been free. Even in his grand pursuit to chase this, even he comes to realize that his future actions of what he foreseen were actions he would have taken regardless, and whether or not this is due to time being linear or his nature overtaking all rational thoughts is beside the point, because in the end, the decisions Eren made were the decisions he would have made regardless, because that's just who Eren is. Eren, complacent in his dream and ideals of freedom, sacrificed his own freedom in order to protect everyone he cared about. The losses along the way were necessary sacrifices he was willing to accept because he believed it would bring his people, his friends, true freedom and peace. Eren sacrificed lives, relationships, his dreams, ideals, and ultimately his life to secure peace for his people, and in the end, the place he called home fell to calamity anyway. You see, this is the part of the story I came to appreciate the most and where others found fault with, and the main reason I was able to see these two concepts within the founding Titan: complacency and sacrifice. To remain complacent will only bring about inaction or fault you in your pursuits of your grander goals because you refuse to change and see things from a different perspective. We see Eren himself come to terms with this when he converses with Reiner and tells him that they are both the same. And honestly, he's right. They both are the same. Because even when presented with the fact that humanity was more nuanced than they initially thought, with Reiner realizing that Eldians of Paradis weren't devils, and Eren realizing that everyone across the sea wasn't an enemy, those two, still complacent in their beliefs, still would go above and beyond to reject that notion because they wanted to move forward, because they felt like they had no other choice. But that's nuance as well. People aren't wholly good or wholly evil. It's easy for me to sit here and say, from the perspective of a reader, and say that Eren should have considered something else, or Reiner should have left with Annie and Berthold after Marcel's death. But people are complicated. That's just the way things are and how events can play out. And unfortunately, they did play out this way. I think an important takeaway as far as complacency goes that you can learn is that when presented with something new or unfamiliar, especially towards certain situations that you have a particular feeling about, is to be able to understand and also take actions that will be the most logical and not act based on predisposed information that could potentially have you worse off because you felt like you had no other choice. Sacrifice is also a necessity sometimes, and maybe one day you will have to part with something that you genuinely found appreciation for or comfort in. You can also take away that all sacrifice, no matter how much, is worth it. These are options you yourself must weigh on a set of scales and be able to determine the most likely outcome that is to take place once those actions have been made. Because in the end, it's the life we decided, and we have to be willing to accept things for what they come to be, even if we die, and even after death. The prices of our choices, regardless if they are sins or not, must be paid.
いってらっしゃい、エレン。
I hope you all enjoyed this video on the Founding Titan, and if you did, then definitely be sure to like and comment, and for more content like this, hit that subscribe button. I would genuinely appreciate it, not to mention it will help my channel in the algorithm. If you want to see more of me, my socials are posted in the description below. I would love to chat more with you all, and until next time, I'll see you later.